The death penalty should be abolished in the United States.
While there have been many, many abuses, let's not go too fast in eliminating it.
The American Religious Town Hall meeting is now in session.
Welcome, friends, to the American Religious Town Hall meeting, where the discussion of religious, political, and social issues is meant to promote the cause of religious freedom and to help us better understand each other. And now, here's your host and moderator, Pastor Jerry Lutz.
Thank you, Mark, and I'm very happy to be with you today, and I hope you feel the same about this program. We're glad that you tuned in. We look forward to having you here from week to week. We try to encourage the writers and those who participate in this program to really produce some very thought-provoking, interesting programs. I think today we have one. But before we get started, let's have our panelists introduce themselves. So let's turn to the gentleman to my right.
I'm Bishop Michael Olson, and I am the Bishop of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Fort Worth.
I'm Jordan Offsire. I am a retired rabbi living in the Palm Springs area and teaching and leading services throughout the community.
I'm Tom Plumley. I'm the minister of First Christian Church in Fort Worth, Texas. We're a part of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ.
Hi, I'm Dan Stearns, a Seventh-day Adventist pastor working at Richardson Seventh-day Adventist Church on the north side of Dallas and the Dallas-Fort Worth mission field.
And I'm Othel H. Lakey, a bishop in retirement of the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, living outside of Atlanta, Georgia.
I'm John Peterson. I am an Episcopal priest in the Diocese of Washington and canon at the National Cathedral in Washington.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen, for being here today. This is actually a continuation of a program that we did not so very long ago. So if you're tuning in, this is part 2, and we welcome you here. For centuries, the validity and justice of the death penalty has been called into question, not least in Christian circles, often by those opposed to war and carrying arms at all, such as Mennonites and Quakers. Today, a majority of Americans still favor capital punishment, though support is dwindling year by year. While there are many reasons to oppose the death penalty as being, for example, part of Old Testament times, it should not be overlooked that the law of Moses required as evidence the sure testimony of 2 eyewitnesses who were willing to be subjected themselves to death if their testimony was false. We don't require such a high standard today. There are several serious problems with capital punishment, such as false convictions, unequal access to legal counsel, racial inequality in applying the death sentence, many years, even decades of litigation and appeals, the great financial burden to the community and state. Those are just some of the issues this particular subject brings into discussion. But today, I'd like for our panelists to discuss these 3 questions. First, should the death penalty at most be a rare maximum for terrible crimes rather than mandatory sentences for murder? Second question, can life imprisonment without a chance of parole be viewed as a more terrible punishment? And finally, should the death penalty be removed because of a sense of the barbaric or because it goes, like slavery, counter to the very essence of life and dignity of the human person? Let's return now to those who opened our program with their opening statements, and we'll ask them to elucidate further on what they said. For that, let's go back to Bishop Olson.
Thank you very much. In your moderator's statement, you detailed quite well sort of the history of the theological development in Christian circles, at least, but even dating back to the Jewish origins of the Hebrew Scriptures for an understanding of the death penalty or capital punishment in principle. But I wanted to especially take this position away from that and focus more on the context of the United States. And I think even in the classical sense that would permit it for those, for example, in the Catholic tradition under double effect or even under the just war theory, we lack the ability in the underlying anthropology to adjudicate the death penalty in a just way, even given the traditional principles. What do I mean by that is that our society, and especially our form of government and our culture, we tend to try to resolve our social problems by taking human life, all right? Whether it's abortion, whether it's war, whether it's capital punishment. And with that, we have a very theoretical approach to this. It's sort of utilitarian ethic that sort of approaches these problems as a social problem without looking at the narrative of the individual person. We can see this played out by the way these cases are adjudicated in really an imbalanced way, given what kind of access people have to proper legal counsel. And we have a legal system with regard to this, but not really a justice system, except that it's procedural in nature. Certainly, when it's applied in that way, we see that the death penalty then becomes not even a chance of having a deterrent effect in society, which is one of the main reasons for justifying it. I think we need to abolish it in the United States, given our very individualistic philosophy and our market approach to resolving all of our social issues.
All right, thank you, Bishop. Now, across the table, welcome back, Pastor Stearns. It's actually been quite a long time since we've had you here on our program, but you took a decidedly different tack on this subject, and would you care to please tell us more about your thoughts on the subject?
Yes, this is a very complex subject. This is a difficult one, and it seems like no matter how you come at it, you have trouble. There's problems. So whenever I come to a very, very complex situation, I always say, well, let's go back to the beginning. Let's go back to the very beginning and see what we find. And one of the earliest things we find in the Bible comes right after Noah gets off the ark with 8 people. Of course, it's not anything like the movie. You owe it yourself to read what the Bible says. But right after he gets off the ark with 8 people, his population of planet Earth, then God says to him in Genesis 9, verses 5 and 6, "Surely for your life blood I will demand a reckoning. From the hand of every beast I will require it, and from the hand of man, from the hand of every man's brother I will require the life of man. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed." And then it gives the reason. For in the image of God he made man. In other words, way back at the beginning, when we go back this far, it says that whenever somebody takes somebody else's life, they have in their own mentality a diminished view of the image of God and the person who they took the life. And that as a result, their life should be taken not by the other person, but by a collective justice done to the person who did this. Now, when we get farther into the Bible, we see that all of us deserve the death penalty. The wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life. And we find that there were certain guidelines put in place that you could never have a death penalty carried out unless you had 2 witnesses that were eyewitnesses, that those witnesses knew that if they perjured their witness, they themselves would receive the death penalty. This doesn't happen in our society today. And so we're a far cry from back then. But back then there were certain guidelines and principles. Today we have to try to sort it all out so many years afterwards. But if we can get some of those principles that says every person has the image of God in them, but when they take that life, God has said they should have their life taken by the collective wisdom of witnesses who saw it, then we have a different perspective.
All right, thank you very much for that clarification, expansion. Let's come over next to you as Rabbi Ofsire. Your position, please.
Yes. We need to realize that in the Jewish tradition, the Bible is not the last word. The Bible is continued in the Jewish tradition through the text that interprets it first, which is called the Mishnah, and then the Talmud, which is the great repository of biblical understanding as seen through the eyes of the rabbis who had to apply that biblical perspective to their everyday lives. And there is a significant, very significant difference between the biblical perspective and the Talmudic perspective, and it is the Talmudic perspective which is normative. That is the way the Jewish tradition looks through. Very, very, very briefly, it begins with the requiring of 2 witnesses, and if their testimony conflicts, then they receive the punishment that they would have inflicted. But it goes far beyond that. Circumstantial evidence is not accepted in a Jewish court of law. It was only the court of 71 or 72 that was able to adjudicate capital crimes. And those who were seeking to justify the person accused had far more opportunity to express their views. And just one more, which is really very striking. And if the court had already, the Sanhedrin, already concluded that the person is guilty, this is the tradition that they carried out. The person who is going to be executed has to be out of town, out of the city, and would be followed by someone who is riding along behind that cortege, if you will. And if anybody had come up with new evidence, even at that very last minute, that evidence had to be heard before the execution was carried out. And so there was an expression by one of the rabbis who said, a Sanhedrin that takes one life in 8 years, and others say one life in 80 years, was called a murdering Sanhedrin, because the death penalty was so rarely applied within the Jewish tradition. That's the context. What I think I have come to, having changed throughout my life, is the expression that the moderator presented, not the expression, the perspective, which is the death penalty should be a rare maximum for terrible crimes rather than mandatory sentence for murder.
All right, thank you very much, Rabbi. Let's come across the table, down the way. Bishop Lakey, your thoughts on the subject.
I appreciated all that has been said. I take strong issue with my good friend, Pastor Cerns. I am adamantly opposed to the death penalty for the various reasons, of course, which the moderator so eloquently laid out before, that we have a very unjust justice system, and the disproportionality of the poor and the racially charged types of injustices don't need to be discussed here. My point I want to make, however, is more theological. That this image of God, God created humankind, and only God gives life. And I believe that only God should take life. And so when human beings do the dastardly deeds as humans do, they should be punished. They should be locked away from society. But life is precious. And I think it's something is taken away from a society that takes human life for whatever reason. I think we are lesser as a people when we have the death penalty as a part of our so-called justice system.
All right, thank you very much, Bishop Lakey. And now let's come up to Bishop Olson. Again, your position so far on the response that you've heard.
Well, I guess I would also reaffirm that we lack a philosophy that's sound for a policy to maintain a prison system. And if we have a relativistic and pluralistic ethics, how can we maintain a corrective system of an institution, or even a punitive system and without an objective sense of order or values, it devolves into simply the subjective and therefore only self-interest. And in a culture of self-interest, the poor, those without access, the weak, and the vulnerable will always come up short. And this includes in the way we adjudicate capital cases in the United States.
All right, thank you very much. And next to you now, Reverend Plumley. We've yet to hear from you on this.
I guess I need to begin theologically. My position on capital punishment comes from that basic understanding from scriptural understanding of how we were created, that we're created in the image of God, and each of us bears that. The first thing we have to do in order to kill is to dehumanize. And you'll notice that this isn't just the case for war. We do a good job of presenting on television and in movies and in everyday life and in news accounts of killings. We do a good job of dehumanizing the perpetrator of certain offenses. And that's the first thing we have to do as a society in order to justify in our own minds what we're going to do in capital cases. And that behavior is contrary to, I think, the understanding that each of us is created in the image of God. And so theologically, I'm opposed to the death penalty. That doesn't say anything at all about all the sociological reasoning that to be against it as well. The disproportionality of sentencing regarding who the perpetrator is. If the perpetrator is a person of color, is much more likely to be a capital sentence. If the victim is a white person, the sentence is much more likely to be a capital sentence. And it has been shown over and over again that it depends on what county you're in the United States as to the likelihood of a capital sentence being passed down. I remember first time I ever served on a jury, it was a murder case, and that county was known as a hanging county that always had juries that were wanting to kill people. From county to county, it's different. And that in itself is a mark of the injustice of the system.
All right, thank you very much. Canon Peterson, we've yet to hear from you. Would you please share with us your thoughts?
Well, I feel it's also important to lay my cards on the table. I've always been opposed to the death penalty, and I can remember as a young boy, really young, discussing with my friends, what does it mean, you shall not kill? Today, there are 24 countries which have and use the death penalty. The United States, along with Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, North Korea, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Somalia, Syria, and Yemen, are 10 of the 24 countries who still use the death penalty. There are no European countries that use it, with the exception of Belarus. There are no countries in Central or South America who have the death penalty. A person who's had a tremendous influence in my life on this subject is Archbishop Desmond Tutu, the former Anglican Archbishop of Cape Town. Archbishop Tutu, Desmond has said, to take a life when a life has been lost is revenge, not justice. Tutu argues that retaliation, resentment, and revenge have left us in a world soaked with blood of far too many of our brothers and sisters. And he argues that the only way that this cycle can be broken is if we remove government-sanctioned violence. And he gives 4 different points. Violence breeds violence. Nowhere has it been shown that the death penalty reduces crime or political violence. In country after country, the death penalty is used disproportionately, as we have said time and time again around this table, against the poor or against racially defined minorities. 3, the death penalty is often used as a tool for political repression. And 4, it is an irrevocable punishment, resulting inevitably in the execution of people innocent of their crimes. It is a violation of fundamental human rights. And I want to add just one more thing. What I oftentimes find to be so incredible in our discussions about the death penalty in this country is that so often the people who are most pro-life, people in the abortion discussion, are often the most vehement in their support of the death penalty.
All right, I wish we had a little more time to explore that angle. Maybe in a future program we could. But we're out of time for this segment. Not out of time for the program entirely. There are summary statements going to be made, so if you have more to say, save it for then. For now, Mark has an important message we'd like for you to hear.
Thank you, Pastor Lutz. We hope you are enjoying today's program. If you would like to learn more about the American Religious Town Hall, please visit our website at americanreligious.org. That's americanreligious.org. There you can read about the mission and history of the program, learn about the Town Hall estates, and view past programs by clicking the appropriate menu buttons. Each week, Pastor Lutz looks forward to receiving your letters. You may write to him at the address shown on your screen. Send your letters to Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. That's Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. Thank you for writing, and thank you for watching. And now, back to you, Pastor Lutz, and today's closing statements.
Thank you, Mark, and welcome back. I do look forward to hearing from you, your suggestions about future topics, and also we solicit your prayers. We are assured of that by many who write in, and we thank you for that. And if you are able to help promote this program and support it in any way, particularly financially, we would appreciate that as well. Now let's go to our summary statements, and for that, let's return to Bishop Olson. Please, you're first.
I stated at the start of this program my personal belief that the death penalty should be abolished in the United States of America. Each and every person is created in the image and likeness of God. To adjudicate any sort of legal system on objective principles, we have to recognize not only a common sense of law, but also a common understanding of who the human person is, and then how do we call everyone to justice. If we simply adjudicate on principles of self-interest, the poor, the weak, the vulnerable will always lose, and especially tragic results when the issue of human life is involved.
Thank you, Bishop. Next to you, Reverend Plumley.
Thank you. I've boiled mine down to 6 principles. The first is that we should not execute because we execute the innocent. At least 4%, it is estimated, of the people who are executed are not guilty. Second, morally, we become what we seek to eliminate. Thirdly, is the disproportionality argument that we've made several times. Fourthly, that it is not a deterrent. There's never been any evidence that it deters crime. 5, it contributes to the violence of our culture. And 6, it requires us to dehumanize the other person before we can do it. We have to call them a monster.
Thank you for that quick and efficient summary. Next to you is Bishop Lakey.
Thank you very
Your
much.
summary, please.
The unwanted taking of human life is evil. But for society to take a life in retaliation or revenge is the perpetuation of evil. You do not overcome evil by doing more evil.
And thank you. Across the table, Canon Peterson, your summation.
Yes, I'd like to pick up on the theme of the violence and what we are experiencing today in this nation in relationship to violence. And the perpetuation of that, as seen in the different executions that have recently taken place, only perpetuates that type of violence. And certainly if we're interested in and if we're serious about the image of God, that is absolutely typical of the very nature of who God is.
And thank you, Pastor Cerns. You're next for your summary statement, please.
You know, all of us around this table are related if you go back not just to Adam, but to Noah and Mrs. Noah and the 3 kids. And God said to our common ancestor, "Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. For in the image of God he made man." We see horrible abuses in this country and other countries, injustices, but let's not brush aside those words of Scripture to our common ancestor too quickly.
All right, thank you, Pastor Stearns. Now, Rabbi Offsire.
Yes, I'd like to suggest that if indeed a number of us have said that the murderer is created in God's image, why don't we say the same thing about the victim? The victim surely then is at least as likely to be created in God's image. I'd like to remind everyone about that. And that's why the issue is so terribly difficult. There is no clear answer and clarification of the issue of capital punishment. And so what I've come to today, might change tomorrow, is that it should be very, very rare, and it should be the maximum for the most terrible of crimes, because even the victim was created in God's image.
Thank you very much. And for the rest of our panelists, I want to extend my thanks and appreciation for your being here today. We never promised that we would always agree. In fact, the genius of this program is that we often don't. And that creates, I think, a great atmosphere for sharing and for what the purpose of this program really is, and that is to come to the table with different perspectives and to understand that there is a place where we can discuss them openly and freely together. And so I'm very glad that you were here today to watch this program and to witness in action our great responsibility as well as privilege of being able to share with one another our points of view and perspectives. Hopefully this will add to the discussion in your home, maybe in your church, in your community. For when we are talking about things, it keeps us working together. It's when we kind of silo and separate from one another that problems can occur. So thank you for being a part of this town hall. That's why it's called the town hall, coming together to have these discussions. We look forward to seeing you again next time.
Hear, hear.
Now, the charter of the American Religious Town Hall provides that Roman Catholics, Protestants, Jews, educators, and others may appear on this program and can declare their beliefs without hesitancy. And the rest of the members of this panel will uphold and guarantee that American right to all who will appear, irrespective of race or creed, so that the rest of the world can see that here in America, we do believe in civil and religious freedom, not only in theory, but in reality. So now, friends, until next week at the same time and over the very same channel, the American Religious Town Hall meeting stands adjourned. And may the God of all of us bless all of you.
We got through that.